Tag TV, and Tag Radio, rapidly becoming the leading technology new media in all of Georgia and the Southeast. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by Integrated Learning Services, integratedlearningservices.com. Wait, worry, or take control. At integratedlearningservices.com, increase sales, productivity, and client retention. Lower training costs. integratedlearningservices.com. Whoa! Something dramatic has happened to the digital display industry. Suddenly, bulky, heavy, rigid, flat panel screens, well, they're obsolete. Imagine taking your huge home theater, rigid flat panel, weighing several hundreds of pounds, have it weigh less than, say, 10 or 20% of the obsolete, power-hungry behemoth, and then have it be flexible enough to fold or roll up and be carried to anywhere you want to place it. A 112-inch diagonal screen, thinner than a candy bar, and sips less power than a coffee maker. The bright screen is less than 1 inch thick, it's durable, and it's even waterproof. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, July 13, 2010, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. For the first time, digital screens can now be placed on odd-shaped or even curved walls, hung from ceilings, or even wrapped around columns. Light-emitting display components with polymer substrates and flexible electronics, indoor, out-of-home, digital architecture, military, trade shows, and beyond. And it's an innovation from Silicon Valley, right? Wrong. It's the original patented innovation of Atlanta, Georgia's own NanoLumens. Up to today's Tech Talk, Tino takes you to one of the top 10 most innovative companies in our state, possibly the entire United States, as he speaks with John Wilson, NanoLumens president. John grew up in Atlanta. After 15 years in Washington working in technology and policy settings, he returned to Atlanta in 1993 as CEO of a consortium organized by the Southern Company and Georgia Tech to work on electric drive components. The team had numerous successes, from the Army's first hybrid electric Humvee to a new product class of digital processor chips for analog devices. A top exec at PR giant Hill & Knowlton, serving as director of the global environmental practice, John also helped launch the Atlanta Clean Air advertising campaign and led a joint venture between Mercedes and a local entrepreneur, Don Panos, exploring electric small cars for the automobile marketplace. Be ready to be amazed, not just by the innovation, not even by the dramatic disruptive impact it's going to have, but by the amazing fact that NanoLumens is born and bred right here in Georgia, and it's about to change everything. As Tino speaks with NanoLumens president John Wilson.
John, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk today.
Thank you so much for having us today.
Well, NanoLumens hopefully at some point will become a household term, but at this point in time I would assume that some of our many listeners may not know what NanoLumens is or does. So why don't you talk about the company and what it's about?
Well, let me first begin by saying that we broke into the public setting at the TAG Top 10 event for 2009, and we were very honored to be pulled into that process by a number of our friends here in the Atlanta area who knew what we were doing in developing a flexible display technology for largely business applications at first, but looking with an eye towards the consumer market down the road. And just thoroughly enjoyed that process. Of course, Rick Cope and his wife, Karen Robinson, have been involved in tech companies in the past in the area and had a good affinity for some of the people involved. And it was a great year for us to break out into the open. But today, as we're talking, we're actually bringing a product to market, which is kind of a very exciting step for us.
And you have a flexible display. Go into that a little bit. It was amazing at the summit, and you're being quite humble today because I think you guys took home most of the hardware there in respect to being recognized for cool technology and a variety of other recognitions that were actually voted on by the people in the audience. So I thought that was great. But particularly when they folded the display in half, I think that amazed people. But talk a little bit about that.
Well, that day is a good example. We on that day, Rick pulled out of a shopping bag, basically a 23-inch flexible display that was running a version of Shrek 3, the movie, and the audience gasp was a very good indication of the kind of reaction we get to the technology. From that point to today, we've actually developed a product. We've actually launched a 112-inch display.
Wow.
Quite a bit larger, that has already been used by a number of major companies to support their sales activities and their trade shows and their marketing. We've had devices in the windows at Macy's in Herald Square in New York. We've had devices at major auto shows, and even as recently as a few weeks ago here in Atlanta, the Entrepreneur of the Year Award that Ernst & Young runs had one of our displays being used to support that presentation evening. So we're breaking out into the market. We're quite excited about it. The technology is destined primarily for advertising and other business support applications, and so you'll start to see them in more and more locations around the country.
So the one that you just described is 112 inches. So just for curiosity, how much does something like that weigh?
That device weighs less than 75 pounds.
Oh, wow.
And is about an inch thick. And it's the ability, if you can make it flexible, then you also manage along the way to put the device on a diet and get the weight down and get the girth down, if you will. So that gives you a number of creative opportunities for both the use and the installation of the device. It's just we were just on the phone a few minutes ago with a company that's opening a new retail outlet in New York, and they have decided they want to put a couple of our devices in two windows that meet each other at a very prominent intersection in New York, and it would be virtually impossible to stuff an existing technology display device into the space they have, but we fit nicely. And we can actually match the size. We can build it any size and any shape, so we can actually match the size of the window that they have facing these very busy streets in New York City, and give them a real nice marketing boost as a part of it. So
how did this idea first come about that you and Rick Cope decided to launch NanoLumens and pursue that goal of flexible display?
Well, it's an interesting story, and it's something I think is kind of relevant for anybody that's in the tech world thinking about doing their next thing. Rick had just returned to the States from having raised money and completing the construction of a lithium battery plant in China, and I had just wrapped up a project with Donald Panos up at Panos Motorsports and Mercedes as well on a project that they were working on jointly. So the two of us, got together and had the conversation that one always does. What are you doing next? And we made a decision that I like to refer to the old Hewlett-Packard decision. Two guys that graduated from Stanford and said, we ought to do this together. And so we made a decision to take our own money, pool it, and go on the hunt for our next big thing. And we spent about 6 to 9 months traveling around to national labs. We went to DARPA. We talked to a number of sources, obviously Georgia Tech relationships that we had, Emory relationships that I had, and at the end of the day found this very interesting technology at the World's Best Technology Conference in Austin, Texas, that a professor up in Canada had filed a couple of patents on. And his idea was to embed some light-making material into plastic and then try to somehow grow that into a display large enough to serve the laptop market. And Rick actually got a couple of guys from Oak Ridge to look at the technology during a lunch break, and they came back after lunch and said, it's really pretty cool. There's nothing really in the way of doing it. Don't have a clue whether it's economical or not. That's a business plan issue. But we would bless it in terms of the general technology approach that they've had. And it's very innovative. It's something nobody else, we think, has thought of. So with that kind of early blessing, the two of us hired three, what we like to call the three wizards that we started with. From the display industry, we hired the former CTO of Philips Display. We hired the former head of the International Display Society, which is the big trade association for the Samsungs and the Sonys and the LGs of the world. And when we came back, actually, DARPA gave us the name of a Georgia Tech professor who had been running a large shop for the U.S. Display Consortium here at Georgia Tech, doing research for, at the time, the space shuttle. They needed some solutions to some display needs on the space shuttle. And hired all three of them, said, go look at this idea, come back, give us a report, tell us what you think. And if it comes out unanimous, was our internal view between Rick and I, was our deal. We get unanimous consent, then we'll put our money and our friends' money and get started and go at it. So that's basically how we got into this. Now,
just to, again, bring to life for those listeners that may not be familiar with your product, when you call it a display, I mean, as a layman would be looking at it, it would look, I guess, something like a big TV. Is that the wrong way to describe it, or?
That's just perfectly right. Just think of it as a very large monitor that you could hook your laptop to and run any kind of content, whether it's a video, a television show, an ad, a PowerPoint, or whatever. And that's basically what we're bringing to the market. The difference is, as you get larger in size, the commercial options you have in the business world are extremely expensive. They're very, very fragile. They're very, very heavy, and they generally, a large percentage of them break before you get them up on the wall. And so what we bring to the market is something that's much more robust, much more durable, and thus it enables you to use that idea of a large display and the creativity you can bring to that opportunity just about anywhere you could think of it.
So here you have a 112-inch display or screen, and it's 75 pounds, and you can actually fold it up and bring it to different places?
That's exactly right. We can roll it up and ship it. We can, the interesting thing about the way we built it is we build these out of parts that are think of something about the size of your hand, that are all light-making, that have all our light-making and electronic parts on them. And then we can use those building blocks to build something that's literally any shape or size. We use 112 inches as a standard business unit, but virtually 80% of the business we've quoted since we announced the availability of the product has been for custom sizes that are much larger. And so think of an advertising banner that is this, go to an airport and think of something that you see as an advertisement on the wall. We could replace that with a display the exact same size, fit in the cabinet, and bring you a brilliant, bright, affordable display in that setting and allow you to change it any time of the day. So think of, instead of putting one ad up that's in plastic with lighting behind it, we can run literally a digital display and allow you to change it and rotate it, just like you see the digital billboards on the street that are running very simplistic ads right now because they're limited by highway rules. In the indoor environment, you can run pretty much anything you want to, including movie trailers and much more exciting content.
Now, prior to the interview, we were talking about the term that you used, that this is largely a fabless manufacturing plant. I wasn't sure what that meant. So for our audience, explain what fabless means, and then also how can you do that kind of manufacturing in the Atlanta area, or do you?
Well, that's probably the most exciting thing about our current business plan. When we started the company, Rick and I assumed, because we'd both been involved with manufacturing activities in the past, that we would be standing up a factory somewhere. And so we went about our business, divvying up the engineering and the activities associated with that, leading up to manufacturing, getting quality control. We even hired a very talented GE-trained Six Sigma black belt who has sourced products and run factories in various parts around the globe. the interesting thing along the way is the technology, as we continue to develop it, offered us the opportunity to shift from our factory and our CapEx to someone else's factory and their CapEx. And so the finances and the lead times and the flexibility just changed dramatically. What fabless means is, and it's a term of art that was created in the chip world when, in the old days, if you were building a silicon chip, you had to be inside a large integrated, vertically integrated silicon company that designed and owned the factories for all the fabs and actually drew the silicon out, tested it, etched it, put all the parts on the silicon and produced a wafer chip that would then go in a computer somewhere. When that model broke and those same factories started producing chips that were designed by others, the concept of fabless emerged, and the explosion of design strengths and engineering talent associated with designers coming to the table. They didn't have to work for the large company. They could work for a small specialized company designing a specialized chip, and the runs could be smaller, so that the numbers changed dramatically. That noise you heard was a large lightning bolt in the background, so obviously electricity is part of our business. So in our case, we were able to develop a series of opportunities that allowed us to take our components, our parts for our display, and take them to the large manufacturers who make parts for the global display industry, and under contract, NDA, and all the like, have them manufacture those parts for us, and then bring them together. And we actually bring them together for final assembly here in Norcross, or here in Suwanee, excuse me. What's intriguing is we actually build some of the parts from scratch and source them here in the Georgia and southeastern area. But we build and source things all over the world, all the way to Asia. But at the end of the day, the final assembly and all the quality control and all the manufacturing know-how come together in a facility literally 10, 15 miles from our offices here in Norcross. And that's at a company called Sienna Group, which is a major asset to the area. They're a global contract manufacturer. They make the Select Comfort bed electronic parts. They make a lot of things you might see at a Radio Shack or maybe even at a Best Buy, manufactured for someone else's brand name. They make a lot of things for the military, and they have 100,000 square feet here, a few 100,000 square feet up the East Coast, another 500,000 spread out in Fremont, California, and then I think 1 million square feet spread between Bangalore and Shenzhen. So gives you a sense of some of the capacity we have in the system.
Well, speaking for the Georgia technology community, we're certainly happy you're doing a lot of the work here. We've got time for one more question, and I've heard that there's actually a green element to the technology. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, two things I'd mention here. One is that our markets are global, and they're very, very large. These are billion-dollar markets we're stepping up to, and a lot of the companies that are in them, the large global advertisers, the large exhibit makers, the large corporations who do lots and lots of trade shows every year, they have an increasing focus on things that are green. They're either reporting their green profile, they're reporting their CO2 emissions, or they have very aggressive programs to actually address their footprint on the Earth. And as such, we are really pleased to bring a product to market that on day one, first product, is dramatically more energy efficient than anything you could buy to get a similar amount of space turned into video. And in addition to that, the materials and the processes used for manufacturing them are all of the latest, so they're going to continue to benefit from the global push to more green product manufacturing in the electronics industry. So we're quite thrilled with that. I mean, our first 112-inch unit, you could go buy a 103-inch plasma from a major manufacturer. It would weigh 497 pounds. Our 112-inch unit weighs 75. That same plasma would require a 208 three-phase filtered circuit when you plug it in, so you would have to do a lot of special things in your building. we give you a plug to plug into a 110-inch outlet. And at the end of the day, we run that with less power than the coffee maker in your house.
Wow.
So very, very efficient device.
Well, John, congratulations on to you and Rick and all the players that have been involved with the development of NanoLumens. And I know you're going to go places with the company. You already are starting, and we'll be on the lookout. And hopefully a year from now we'll be able to interview you again, and you can talk about the progress.
Thanks so much. We really enjoyed being with you on Tech Talk today.